Thank you very much, Owen. I'm not sure I'm going to explain why exactly, well, fully, but I am going to address to some extent how I ended up in Tukuyu. So, good morning, everyone. I'm a PhD student in anthropology at the University of Manchester in the UK. An anthropological approach to research, as I understand it, means that I live with the people that I am researching, that I aim to participate and to observe, participate in and observe what they are doing, as well as them asking questions, and that where we disagree, I aim not to correct them, but to understand what they're doing. An anthropological approach to presentation normally involves reading out an essay. So I'm going to try and not do that. I might not be as polished as... I noticed the agronomists particularly seemed very impressive in their presentation. So I might not be that polished, but I'll give it a try. Just to introduce my talk, I live with the Nyukyusa people in a village about 10 kilometers away from Tukuyu, which is the main town in Rungwe District. Where do I... Oh, I've got to do it on here. Right, so here we've got Mbeya Region on the left, indicated by the red, then Rungwe Region, and then Tukuyu town. The Nyukyusa people are banana farmers and cattle keepers. And you can kind of see in the background, the landscape. This is a photo I've taken of a typical landscape, so you can see it's mountainous. You can see bananas, there's some tea in the background there, and a very few napier grass plants. The people that I live with have also been the beneficiaries of successive dairy development projects for about the last 40 years. These revolve around the potential for milk to improve their lives. So firstly through the nutritional properties of milk, and then the resale value of milk. And these efforts have also looked to increase milk yield, obviously. The definitions of technology that I'm going to work with are very broad. So it includes imported dairy breeds of cattle. So talking about Holstein Friesian, Guernsey, Jersey, Ayrshire. It also includes different methods for keeping cattle. So keeping them in cowsheds, using zero grazing methods. And additionally, it includes other foodstuffs that are designed to increase milk yields. So I'm kind of thinking about all those things as technology. Before I begin and get into perhaps to Owen's point a little bit, I want to say that my approach is informed by my previous work. So advising philanthropists, advising foundations, and investment firms. And this might seem a long way away from anthropology, but I think it's important because I'm informed, or I'm interested in the culture and the traditions of boardrooms in the UK or the US, in offices in Dar es Salaam and in Mbeya, as much as, perhaps as much as I'm interested in the culture and the traditions in a village in Rungwe, in southwest Tanzania, and the impact that they have on the type of initiative I'm going to talk about. Also, I should say, everything I'm saying is provisional. I'm kind of 2/3 of the way through my fieldwork, so I'm very happy to be queried and corrected, and I will welcome any comments, any suggestions, and they will change the direction of my research. So please do let me know anything you have to say. So today I'm going to focus on a transformation. There's been a huge change in cattle keeping in the village that in Gumaka, the village that I live in, since about 1982. So at this time there were, I think, there were literally no dairy cows in the village. Everyone kept cows like these, or I should say the few that kept cows. So that was the preserve of older men, and a relatively small percentage of the wealthier older men who kept cows. They would herd them, or rather their sons, young sons or neighbours would herd them in this way. This is a picture from a neighbouring district, Eyre. But today that doesn't happen at all in Gomaka. Now everyone who farms has dairy cows. There are literally no traditional cows in Gomaka at all. So there are about 4,500 dairy cows, and they're spread among about 1,150 households. And all of these cows, so I should say so that's about 80% of households who have cows there, which is a considerable difference. All of these cows are kept in cow sheds. These are 4 examples, fairly typical, I think. Normally, some with grass roofs, mainly with tin roofs, and these are in various states of repair. So what I want to talk about is the fact that, to me, this is a transformation and a success that is very rare. So we've gone from a situation where a very small minority of people have cows to a situation where almost everybody has cows, and a situation where the cows that are kept are very low yield of milk, so 1 to 2 litres a day typically, to a situation where the average milk yield now of these crossbred cows is about 8 litres of milk per day. So I think this is an important distinction. And what I'm going to do is offer an explanation of how this transformation has occurred that I think speaks to appropriate technology. Now, I'm not saying appropriate technology in the sense it's sort of intermediate technology, or the sense that it employs local techniques, or that it's not capital intensive. It might be some of those things, but the main reason that I think we should think about it as appropriate technology is it has been appropriated by its users. So it is they are the people who decide and who have made it work. So what I'm going to do is describe what's happened in 2 ways. First, by using the descriptions of one of the main organisations behind this transformation, Heifer International, and I'm going to draw really on internal sources that I'll talk about. So the leader of that organisation in the period I'm talking about is our host, Owen Kinsey. So perhaps he can correct me if I get anything wrong. I think Owen's probably too humble to have publicised the type of success I'm engaging with, and especially his role in it, and I hope he doesn't mind me wanting to recognise the significance of that role now. It's not something he knew I was going to do, so I apologise, Owen. But you quoted to me before, you said in Proverbs, it says, let another praise your work, so perhaps something, I can be the other, perhaps for 30 minutes or so now. Now, I'm then, once I've described this first way, using interviews and using the things I've read in various publications provided by Heifer, I'm going to suggest a second way to understand this transformation based on my fieldwork in Gomaka, in the village, and talking to people. The point of that isn't to show that the first case is wrong, but to try and show the transformation in a granular detail that complements and adds to our understanding. And then finally, I'm going to suggest why I think this is important, because appropriation, I think, is key to success here. So the beneficiaries do not just adopt or adapt these technologies; they actually transform them. In order to make my case, and perhaps there should be an apology for an anthropological way of working, I'm going to draw on a major figure in science and technology studies, a guy called Bruno Latour, who maybe some people have heard of. For those who don't, and just very briefly focusing on the idea I'm going to use today, he wrote a paper in 1992 called Technology is Society Made Durable, and like all his papers, it's freely available online, so if anyone wants to find any of his work, it's very easy to do. And what he focuses on in this paper is the process through which successful innovation happens. So what he says is when a new technology is when someone innovates, they introduce a new technology or promote new techniques, and their goal is to get people to adopt them. he says that in order to get people to adopt this innovation, it undertakes a series of paradigm shifts. So he calls this a program of action. But what he's saying is that for an innovation to work, it has to be transformed from the ideas or the intentions of whoever first came up with it. And it has to be transformed by those people who should benefit from it. And this basically means that there is a huge distinction from the original intentions and what actually happens. So there's another paper relating to the Zimbabwe bush pump, which people may be a bit more familiar with. So that's there's a paper by Anne-Marie Moll and Marianne Delete, which again shows really this emphasizes co-construction. So the way that the people who should benefit from this innovation actually transform the design, so it becomes something different. I'm going to do something that I see as related. It's not identical, but I think this is going to be a useful approach. So I'm going to start with a simplified form of Heffer's work that draws on Owen and Dennis Merniak's 2006 book, Daring to Hope, as well as interviews with staff in Dar and in Mbeya, and Heffer actually have an office in Rungwe now as well. I hope I'm going to be able to add some interviews with US staff to that, but I've not been able to do that yet. So I think this kind of section of my understanding will improve. But I'm going to use this model of paradigm shifts that I've talked about. I'll go through them. So Heffer's work began with founder Dan West's vision of not a cup, but a cow. And this follows his experiences working with refugees in the Spanish Civil War. And so he saw that providing people with a productive asset, rather than providing them with a handout, was a more sustainable hand-up, if you like, rather than a handout. Now this is clearly provided by a cow, so it provides milk. It also provides, as part of that process, it provides offspring, so that the cow is productive beyond its own lifespan. And by definition, I think this is a sustainable gift. In Tanzania, Heffer's initial work was through government, through state-run collective farms. The main one being Kitulo Farm, which is now in Rungwe, now in Njombe, in bordering Rungwe. But there were substantial problems with this approach. So cows were not well cared for, mortality rates were high, milk yields were low. And I think the consensus is that's because collective ownership meant that no one really cared for the cows. And this became very problematic. And I think if you go there today, still is perhaps problematic. So Heffer then trialled and rolled out a new approach, which they're now very well known for, the pass on the gift model. I think it started here in Arusha, actually. And through this, they give cows through a local partner to members of self-help groups established by that partner. The partner then assures compliance with Heffer's rules and recommendations. So these are building a bandabora, building an appropriate cattle shed. They also, people have to plant forage crops which the cows can be fed with, so they can be zero grazed. The individual farmers sign up to a contract, which means they will pay back 2 calves. The first one will go to a new member of the group, so to a member of their community. The second one will go back to the local partner so that they can set up more groups elsewhere. Now within this model, what has been particularly emphasised, I think, is the opportunity for individual ownership. So rather than the previous model of collective ownership, which failed, here's a way to distribute, again through groups, so that each farmer, each household owns a cow and can benefit from the produce of that cow itself. And this has been very important to the success, I think, that sense of individual ownership that's been evident through pass on the gift. I think another thing that underpins Heffer's work is a sense of shared priorities, which are underpinned and have been underpinned by Christian values. So whether that's patience, loyalty, kindness, love, humility, and hard work, they all abound in the descriptions of farmers in print and in the conversations I've had, and even down to the names that farmers give their cows in certain regions. So this, I should say as well, this isn't restricted to Christian farmers. So a lot of people have emphasised to me that Muslim farmers can work very well with church groups, that they have the same commitment and the same sense of hard work that Christian farmers do as well.
I think I don't understand anymore because you're talking to yourself. Can you address the crowd, please?
Okay, sure. Okay. So if I hold this higher, does this help? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this sense of Christian values, I think, has been very important. I think perhaps it's changed in the last few years, especially in the way that Heifer presents its work. But for the time I'm focusing on, I think it's important, and it's a major feature. Another key feature of the model has been the use of farmer volunteers and community animal health workers. And we've heard many times in the last few days that farmers learn best from other farmers. And I think it's clear here. I think Heifer could be considered a pioneer of that model. Certainly the people I've spoken to would point to that. And community expertise means that overstretched extension workers are not the only source of support for communities. So they can become genuinely self-reliant through the infrastructure of volunteer farmers, the volunteer trainer farmers that Heifer puts in. So another key innovation of the Pass on the Gift model, I think, is the emphasis on the dignity of passing on a cow. So both the fact that a poor farmer can feel the pride and the dignity of passing on a cow to a member of their community, but also that's a brilliant way of emphasising to donors to Heifer the fact that they themselves should feel dignity and pride in the gifts that they make. I think that's been key to the way they've kind of talked about their work. So looking at this, this is the kind of diagram that Latour would use. And so this line here represents the changes in the paradigm shift that I would identify in Heifer's work. So those to the left of the line are, if you like, supporting that innovation. They're carrying it forward, they're helping it. And those to the right of the line are outside it and not working within it. And the idea is that with each paradigm shift, the number of people supporting dairy development increases to a point where by the end, this can be considered a success, a major success. Now, I think that this set of paradigm shifts helps to explain the transformation, because it is a context in which the situation has changed in Gwamaka, in the village I'm talking about. But it's not sufficient on its own to explain that. So the only way we can do that is by looking at a similar exercise within the village and by relying on respondents. So that's what I'm going to do now. And here we see a different set of paradigm shifts. So interlocutors in the village, so the informants I have in the village, are clear that before 1983 there were no modern cows at all in Gwamaka. So there's one particular man who was the ward councillor, the Diwani of the ward in which Gwamaka lies, and he was responsible for the first dairy cows in the village. He bought one cow from Kitulo farm, and he bought it himself. After that happened, 2 or 3 of the other wealthier members of the village took their own local cows to a government breeding station in order to obtain crossbred dairy cows. And so really, it's 3 or even 4 people in the village who were responsible for the original influx of cows. Now, that is an extension of dairy development in the sense that they wouldn't have had access to those cows were it not for the work I'm talking about. But it follows a different path, if you like, to the heifer model that we know. It's not that doesn't come in, but that the original influx of cows from those first four cows is expanded through crossbreeding. So that's those 4 people having a business, which means that other people in the village can come and breed their cows for, I mean, now the price is 10,000 shillings. So I don't actually know what the price was at the time, which is something I should find out. But so this is the crossbreeding process spread cows considerably for about the next 10 to 15 years, to a point where in 2000 cows were far more common. So up to about 50% of households by that point had their own cows, had dairy cows. There were still local cows were still available. People still kept local cows, but cattle ownership, while it was geared towards wealthier households, had become much more common. So I think in terms of spreading beyond those wealthier households, perhaps it's time now to talk about heifer in trust and how that's worked. So the first group that I found, there are 2 heifer in trust or pass on the gift groups in Gwamaka they've operated. The first one began in 2004. It was started through a Pentecostal church. The project supervisor, or heifer's project supervisor, who was on secondment from the district livestock office, came to the church and he spoke to the congregation. He told them that they would need to form a group, elect their own leaders. They would need to build sheds to an approved design. They would need to plant a certain amount of grass. They would need to pay a certain amount in order to receive cows. So on the basis of that, 10 people came together. They elected a chairperson, then and a secretary. They later elected a volunteer trainer farmer. And they paid 5,000 shillings to join that group, and then 20,000 shillings each for the transport of the cows to the village. And approximately 1/4 of those cows were present at the time of receipt. That's what members have suggested to me now. So I've found 17 members of this group who I've spoken to, both founders and those who've joined later, to find out more about what actually happened in practice. So largely they agree on what happened. They agree it was a Pentecostal church project. They can name the individual project leader. In 2 cases only, they name heifer. They associate the project more either with the individual or with a neighbouring cooperative group set up by heifer that actually has nothing to do with this project. So heifer itself isn't something that largely they would speak to, apart from those 2 who've attended events held by heifer. In total, I've identified 19 people who received cows through this group. So that's beginning in 2004, and then the last person I found received a cow in 2012. Although estimates from the chairman of the group suggest that up to 50 people have received cows through it. Now, the reason I was unable to grow the list beyond the 19, so that's the 17 people I met, and then 1 person who's died and 1 person who's left, is because, not due to poor memory or poor record keeping, it's because very few of the people ever knew who they gave their cows to. So they talk about so they return their cows to the leaders. They talk about they returned the first cow that was to be passed on to the leaders of the group, and they gave the second cow to the project supervisor or to the leaders, and they don't know who they passed the cows on to. There are even cases of people who received cows who don't know who they received them from. So they must have received them from their neighbours. It's a large village, so that's possible, but it's still quite a long way from what we would expect from the idea of pass on the gift. That, in my mind before I went there, it was almost literally, here's my neighbour, he hasn't got a cow yet. I can give him mine. Now, several people within this group were reluctant to speak to me, and really that was mainly the leaders of the group, and the friends of mine in the village have said this is because they're concerned that I'm interested in establishing some case to recover lost animals, and I think that's a major fear. In the village, particularly though with this group, and so that creates a slightly difficult. It's difficult then to measure the impact of the group when people are concealing it from you. But What's also clear is that it is simultaneously carrying on. So the group last accepted a member in 2018. Well, I've struggled to find out who that is. And they currently have 2 cows which need to be passed on to new members. And so the difficulty is actually becoming a member, finding out about the group and becoming a member of it. So a second heifer and trust group in the village perhaps adds a bit more context. So it was established in 2008, but through the village government, not through any church. And the chairperson of that group has immediately presented me with the records he kept of, so they had 2 training sessions, one before the group and one after it. That was the only 2 that were held, but they gave clear instructions on bander design and on planting of napier grass. This group has deviated from the heifer model in the sense that they decided within about a year to only pass on 1 cow, not to return a cow to the project holder. So, not to return a cow to the project holder. So they just pass on 1 cow to a neighbour. From this group, I've been able to find 24 members. So this is largely through the secretary of the group, who kept reasonable records, and so he's not sure of 2 of the original members of the group. So there are at least 26 people have benefited from these cows, and they've been passed on in the 10 years between the time I did the interview and the founding of the group, somewhere between, in a couple of cases only once, up to about 4 times is the maximum in 10 years. The secretary himself, for example, didn't pass on a cow. So he had a female calf which died. The group therefore voted that he would be allowed to, he subsequently had a male calf which he sold. He kept half the money, and then half the money was returned to the group, and that was considered to be acceptable. But obviously that then stops the chain of passing on the gift, because there is no gift to continue being passed on. So it is difficult to find out, even though this group continues to meet to this day. It meets in a place I'd been hundreds of times before he told me that it meets there, and I had no idea. And none of the people I knew who lived mainly in a different part of the village had any idea that the heifer and trust still existed in the village. So to join this group, members or prospective members must pay 100,000 shillings today. So that's substantially more, but given the cost of a female calf is 300 to 400,000 shillings, it's still a very cheap way to get a cow. But whether that still kind of conforms to the ideas behind or the ideas behind heifer and trust, I'm not sure. I'm less clear on that, and people themselves are less clear on that. So heifer and trust has clearly contributed to the increase in cows in the village. So according to the chair, or the 2 chairs, we're talking about up to about 75 cows have been introduced through heifer and trust, and that's between 5 and 10% of the population receiving a cow, or of the households receiving a cow through heifer and trust. So I think that's substantial. Each heifer has been passed on between 1.25 and 3.75 times within 10 or 14 years. But it doesn't explain the transformation that I've noted. It's not a high enough volume of cows, and so to explain that transformation, I think we need to look at what would normally be called traditional cattle loans. So in Kinyakyusa they're called kufufia, but I know there are similar forms in different places. I know, for example, near Arusha there's a similar form. I'm also not really sure what the word traditional is appropriate, as I'll show. But first I'll explain it. So kufufia is very common in Gumaka today. 60% of respondents to my household survey, which is currently about a fifth of the households, has said that they are either a loanee or a loaner of the cow. So 60% of people are actively involved in kufufia today, and 80% say they have been. So they've either received a cow through it, or they have loaned a cow to someone else. Normally the way that the system works is that if you don't have if you don't have, or in fact if you do have a cow, but you want another one, you find a neighbour or a friend, it's not usually family, and you approach them and ask if you can borrow their cow. So the typical system would be that if you borrow it, the first calf from the cow is yours, and you can keep, and you also obviously can keep the milk. The second calf, the second calf will be returned to the owner. Now you either return the mother to the owner at that same point, in which case you don't benefit from the milk, or the arrangement can continue, in which case you benefit from the milk, you would keep the third cow, they would keep the fourth cow, and it would go on in this way, sometimes indefinitely, and sometimes I know people who've had cows like in this arrangement for, I think, 8 years, 7, yeah. So it can be a very long-standing relationship, but the nature of the loan isn't fixed. So in some cases, if people are desperate for a cow, then they will agree that the owner can take the first calf, and they will take the second calf. And this is obviously considerably less attractive to the borrower, but if they need to, they need to. Also, the loan arrangement can end at any time if the owner says they need that cow back. So they might say they have a family emergency, and there is nothing really that the borrower can do at this point. They must return the cow. And so this makes social capital, or however else you would describe it, very important, because there's no contractual arrangement, but the relationship between the people and between their friends and families becomes very important. And I wonder if this is maybe the reason that families themselves typically don't loan cows to one another. I've seen 1 or 2 examples where they have, and it's always ended badly. But despite these problems, and despite the fact that people actually prefer heifer in trust when it's available, so someone would far rather receive a cow through a pass on the gift heifer in trust model than through Kufufia, because they feel they have far greater ownership of it. Kufufia is the reason, really, that this transformation that I'm talking about has happened. So again, if I talk through this Latorian mode of programs of action, the number of people in the village, the percentage of people in the village who have cows and have modern or have dairy cows has reached 80% because of the Kufufia arrangement. Now I'll come on. I'll say a bit more about why in a minute. But I should also say that while 80% of the people in the village have a cow at any one time, that means virtually 100% own cows over a period of years, because people are always selling cows for emergencies. People only have 2 or 3 cows, so you have to sell all your cows for either problems, for marriage, for funeral. In some cases, people say school fees, but I think that's an exaggeration. But that means that virtually everyone has a cow, or has had a cow in the recent past, or will have in the future. So this is near the end of what I want to say, but I'm not quite there. What I've tried to depict here is 2 programs of action. So 2 different programs of action for an important reason. I'm not trying to say that one is right and the other is wrong, and I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. But what I'm trying to suggest is that they're both required to gain support from actors that are necessary to dairy development. So, and that happens through a series of paradigm shifts. So the first program of action that I talked about is vital to gain the support and to gain the active involvement of donors, supporters, volunteers and staff of Heifer International, and those who believe in dairy development, to put it broadly. The second is focused on the paradigm shifts of the intended beneficiaries. And actually there's a considerable divergence between them. So there are marked differences, and I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say or not here, but I think it's important to recognise it. And the reason it's important to recognise it, I'll just give one example of why I think it is focused on Kufufia, but I'm happy to give more if people are interested later. The reason is, if we think about why people engage in Kufufia, in these cattle loans, it's not because of generosity. Generosity doesn't really feature in these arrangements. Instead, the number of cows that people can keep themselves is restricted by the amount of banana leaves that they can feed them. So cows in Gwamaka are fed almost entirely on banana leaf. And due to the small land holding, so the average holding will be roughly 2 acres, farmers can only keep at the maximum 3 or 4 cows. And beyond that, they would need to buy grain or they would need to plant fodder crops. And they're very reluctant to plant fodder crops because they've got so little land. They want to plant as much banana as they can in order to make money from it, because banana is the crop that people sell. And so for example, if we look at this slide, this is a friend of mine. You can see in the background here, hopefully, this is the amount, this is a single row of Napier grass. That's the amount of grass that he's planted for 4 cows. And that's fairly typical. So it's a very, very small amount. And let me think, he would use it maybe, very infrequently. It's not a priority or a core component of the diet of these cows. So the success of one technology, the dairy cows, is not matched by that of another, the Napier grass. And without looking in detail in the village, I think you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that. They were introduced together. The former, so the cows are conditional on being matched by the other. You have to plant grass before you can receive a cow. In the case of heifer and trust, for example. But that message has not been, or that technology is not considered to be valuable by the people, by farmers in Gwamaka. So this isn't either, though, this isn't a traditional arrangement, because this practice of feeding cows bananas only came in with the introduction of dairy cattle. So before 1983, no farmers fed their cows banana leaves. They would be kept in the forests and herded in that way. So it's something in between. It's an innovation that appropriates the technologies that farmers value and ignores the rest. And I think that distinction is very important, because engaging with the preferences of farmers is vital to improving ongoing and future dairy development. So there are ongoing projects in Gwamaka now. They're all focused on the dairy value chain, and they're all building on Heifer's work. They're all building on existing dairy development work. But by focusing on the paradigm shifts that I've looked at, and by understanding how technology has been appropriated in the past, I think that we can better contribute to appropriate technology in the future. Thank you.
It was a very interesting presentation. I've seen a number of anthropological presentations, and thank you for standing up and speaking to us instead of your paper and the photographs. You're looking at a time frame since 1983, and it makes me wonder a little bit, and it got me reflecting that so many of our programs in agriculture are really short term. Is there a way for us to look at, rather than, say for example, we come in with a paradigm we assume, are there methods that you could recommend for understanding the paradigms that exist and how to slowly shift to where you would like to be? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you've seen something to compare this presentation to, because I'm aware that I was talking a bit. Thank you. So in one sense, I could give a short answer, which would be, I've not really got any recommendations, and any anthropologist is probably going to start by saying that. But I will try and give something more useful. So, and I was intrigued actually by, this came up in one of the slides in the previous presentation, which was looking at profit. So from a different area of my research, one of the things that I would say is that the current projects I'm looking at in Gwamaka are all focused on the dairy value chain. So getting farmers to sell their milk together as a collective to large processors in Tanzania. And they are all premised on increasing milk production because people will be driven by profit. The decisions that people will make about foodstuffs, for example, will be driven by profit. But the decisions that people seem to make in practice are not driven by profit. And they're certainly not driven by a sense of efficiency. So that the concept of the profit margin, and this is what I saw in the previous paper, which I was intrigued by, the concept of profit as a percentage, rather than, in Swahili, faida is profit and is benefit. In English, they're very, very different things. There's a concept of efficiency to profit that if you think about the corporate world, they'll be focused on. And so, this project, this particular bit of the project that looks on increasing the take-up of advanced food mixes, so they're a mix of grain and oil cake and minerals and fairly standard stuff, to farmers with a guaranteed market for their milk, just isn't working. So people, for example, let's say you should take up, if a farmer is milking one cow, they'll need, say, 60 kilograms for a month. And I know of 10 farmers who borrowed from this, through this arrangement, and they borrow 10 kilos. And then they say it doesn't have any effect, and they don't bother. And the idea that making more profit should persuade them to do so just doesn't seem to work. I'm not sure that there's a gap there, and I think an anthropological type understanding could probably have said that to the instigators of the project beforehand. And now I'm trying to run some small experiments with the farmers to see what might, if anything, will change their mind. So really, for example, working through, actually producing like a cheat card to say, this is what you spend on a litre of milk at the moment. This is what you can spend if you use this. This is the number of litres that you can produce. This is the profit you'll make. And I've got no results from that yet, but I think maybe that's a way in which anthropologists might be useful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have several things which I just want you to take note as you are going on with your studies. There is a project under Sokoine University known as Africa, and it is working on the same area, trying to look on how to improve the dairy industry. And one of the areas which they have found that the fodder issue, which we have spoke about, that the quality of the milk which is obtained is very low because of the fodder. Now they are trying to introduce the fodder with high dry matter content or whatever in order to improve the quality of the milk which is produced, because the price of the milk in that area is very low, and even sometimes they throw away a lot of milk. I didn't know if you have at least tried to check that one. And another thing is about the heifer project, which has worked there in the area for quite some time. Did you, I don't know, I haven't heard if you have tried to at least associate the what you have said, paradigm shift behind the dairy development, if heifer at all has some contribution to that shift. And also, if you can talk about climate change of Tukuyu, especially Mwakaleli area, it's one of the wettest area in Africa. It's very peculiar. It can rain or it is wet more than 10 months of the year, and it just continues like that. So even that one, I think that if you can put it, is that shift also contributed by the weather condition or agroecological whatever. And also the breed, which have been there for quite a long time. You find you can get a 100% breed of dairy cattle. Now, the issue is that farmers are still very poor, and it's because of you have shown the houses of the animal, the cow, the way they are. There is a very poor connection because there is no driving force of post-harvesting handling, like processing, local processing, which could help a lot, even rather than thinking of someone else to buy that milk. That is just what I wanted you to maybe to consider in your studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask, what is the price of you said the price of milk in Morogoro is very low. I'd be interested to know if you know the price
of milk in that area is less than 500 Tanzanian shilling. 500 per liter. Per liter. By that time, and that was last year when I visited that area. I visited Mwakaleli. I was just interested to visit the area. I visited there. It's 500, less than even the water of water.
Yeah, yeah. Because in Gwamaka it's 590 shillings. So it's marginally higher, but yeah, very low. Thank you for those. Thank you for those comments. Yeah, I think the point about the fact that Tukuyu is a unique climate or an unusual climate, I think is very important, and I think is a massive part of why dairy development's been successful there. Yeah, I think that's very important. Thank you.
I'm called Joseph Aliguma once again from Uganda, small farmer, and I also practice mixed farming, agriculture and animals. My concern was about the community in that area. Do they also take the value of the milk? Are they producing milk just to sell, or they can also consume the milk and become more healthy? And also, when I looked at the pictures of the house, though it is zero grazing, in Uganda we knew later that zero grazing is for people who actually don't have land, they only have compound. So in Uganda, some of us, we have tried to extend from zero grazing, and we let the animals move around, have maybe like a small paddock, and also improve on the diet. If we give like the banana stems, and also we mix with some other leaves, some other elephant grass, and not all elephant grass, but some which are good quality, so that the milk is a little bit heavier. So you may find that the price is low because the milk is not really so heavy. My question to you is that when you are there, do you actually find out why they leave the house like that? Is it because they don't have the money to improve on the house? Or, as we shared this morning, God created us to look after the animals as the way we also look ourselves. So I thank you so much for your presentation. It has been so good, but I need to know more about that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, actually, I'll start with the comment you made before, and then I'll work through. Because I think that the point about preferences is very important. So people, the leaders or the instigators of the projects that are working in the village now would say that people do have the money to improve their sheds, but they choose not to, and they would say that that's their preference and it's wrong and it needs to be reformed. And obviously that's a great challenge to do that. I think people, so to maybe to go in a slightly different direction, I do ask people about the decisions that they make. And maybe this is a difference or a distinction in anthropology and some other areas, but I think there's a problem in asking questions like that because people know the right answer. So people are asked research questions a lot, and research to those people is often associated with NGOs and is often associated with the idea that they might be able to be part of if they give the right answer, they might be able to this might be a baseline study, they might be into the project. And so people are constantly, and maybe that seems very cynical, but I've really found that as a massive influence. And people and I can give an example of that to people if you don't mind me digressing. So when I first got to the village, I used to ask people, how many litres of water do you give the cow per day? And people would say between 20 and 60 litres of water a day. And from now, after being there, I got a bit frustrated with the survey because I never saw anybody giving any water to cows. And well, it gets worse. And so I took up the survey again after 6 months or so, and I got a different answer, which was 10 litres a day was the average amount. But still, both were in the wet season, which is very long, as the previous commentator points out. But actually, I would say that from observation, the real amount of water that people give their cows is zero. It's literally zero, because they would say, well, I suppose the average won't be zero, but the average will be 1 or 2 litres a day, because only a very small number of people give any water. So the problem, coming back to your question, with asking people about their preferences, is I'm always worried that they're giving, I say to people, I have no resource, I'm not here with any money, I'm not here with any project, I want to know, and I will tell people what you tell me, and hopefully that will help you, but that's all I can say. But I'm always worried that people are trying to give the correct answer. And therefore, I think observations are very important. So there are, in the village, there's one modern one modern cowshed, if you like, of a type that Heifer would recommend. And that was built 14 years ago by the chairman of one of the groups that I talked about. And he's just kept it going through that. Every other member of those groups, once the cowshed needed to be rebuilt or needed to be repaired, they abandoned that design, which has room for exercise. It has separate areas for milking and for feeding. It has a shelter, and they took on the design in the slides that I showed here. And they also tie their cows up, so that all cows are tied and can't move at all.
He had one question too about if people are consuming the milk or just selling.
Sorry, yeah. But, so people certainly do consume the milk, and it's very popular. So people typically consume the milk as matindi, as soured milk, and that can't be bought in the village because it's so common. Everybody makes it. Everybody drinks milk, and they sell the milk that they can't drink. So the family I live with will probably consume, 7 people probably consume 3 litres of milk a day, and then maybe even 4 litres of milk a day, and then the rest is sold. Okay, I hope that, is there anything I missed? Sorry.
Veterinary treatment, I mean, do people sort of allow for that type of thing? Is it available in your area? And what an impact does it have when if people can do it, and are they willing to have their cows treated? I used to work in Bangladesh, and the wife could drop dead, but they'd always treat the cow. They even find a vet who lived 100 miles away and try to get him or to see him, but the wife and everyone else in the family could be absolutely dead, and I still make sure that cow gets looked after. Have you had something anything like an experience, and is there veterinary treatment available in your area?
Thank you. So there is, so the main veterinary treatment is available through the ward extension officer. So the population of that ward, there's this village which has a population of just under 5,000, and it's one of 4 villages. It's the largest. So let's say there are 10,000 people in the ward, and that will mean there are, I would guess, 10,000 cattle. And there's one extension officer who can, but he does fairly simple matters. So he will do, injections and not much else. If you want advanced veterinary care, there is one person in the district. So, sorry, at the government level, this is government provided. So there is the head of the district livestock office will provide veterinary care in every ward within that district. But there are private providers. So they vary. So there are, if you like, traditional veterinary care, so that particularly for things like mastitis, there are certain people who often it's family, you know, their father's done it before them, and they use certain medicinal herbs and plants to treat mastitis. And that's probably what most people use. There are also a small number of entrepreneurs who've either been encouraged to establish by Heifer or other projects in the area. They typically are doing very simple procedures. So once you get to kind of advanced matters, there's a very, very small number of people for a very large area. And people, so I suppose in terms of spending, people definitely choose the cheapest option when it comes to mastitis. People, if you look at things like AI, for example, there's been a certain experimentation with AI, but people don't do it not because of cost, but because they don't trust the expertise of the people doing it. So you do AI once, it doesn't work. Maybe you pay again, it doesn't work. You've spent already 6 or 7 times what you would have spent to take the cow to the local bull. And these are the same. So this is the same person who's providing AI, who is the #1 provider of veterinary care in the district. So I would say that people's willingness to use veterinary expertise is limited. Thanks for the question.
I think our time now is ended and the food is ready upstairs. Shall we give a thank you to the presenter?